Thank you very much. Thank you very much. And Mike, thank you, and I'd like to thank Heritage for having us here today. I'd also like to thank the Heritage Foundation for your commitment to the common sense, conservative principles that I believe form the bedrock of this country. With many of those values under siege today, you really truly are on the front lines of the fight to get out our message to show America a better way forward. And that's why I am here today to offer a contrasting approach to how Republicans would handle our economic struggles. I want to start by sharing with you what I heard around the Thanksgiving dinner table last week, a set of sentiments that I know families around the country are experiencing. While there was plenty of good food and good cheer, I was struck by the overwhelming sense of pessimism about our nation's future. Instead of looking forward, I heard people talking about the past. Remember how great we used to be? It's not that the folks that I was with believe that we can't get back to those days, but there clearly is a fear and insecurity about the future, not just their own, but their neighbors and their friends. Nearly everyone that I spoke to knew someone who'd lost a job. And if not, they knew someone that was worried about having to make a college tuition payment next semester, or had admitted that perhaps they wouldn't be able to retire as early as they had hoped. No doubt, America is struggling, and people need our help. Question is, are the policymakers in Washington listening? The last 11 months have been spent on an agenda that is out of step with the struggles of the American people. An agenda that expands the reach of government, increases the deficit, and requires us to borrow even more from foreign countries. This agenda includes everything from spending to cap and trade to card check. Clearly, jobs have taken a back seat. As a result, the debt is set to double over the next 5 years, triple in 10. Within 4 years, the federal government will spend $1 billion a day just on interest on the debt. Within 10 years, it'll be nearly $2 billion a day. The $800 billion stimulus bill that Washington passed last January has failed to create or save the jobs promised. The bailout culture in Washington has raised moral hazard problems throughout the economy, signaling to industries that they'll not be held accountable for their mistakes or their poor decisions. Even worse, the proposed volley of heavy taxes and mandates has draped small businesses, the nation's job creators, in a blanket of fear. And that's the reason why small businesses remain on the sidelines, not hiring, not expanding, and not investing. All the while, the Democratic majority continues to push through a $1 trillion government-run healthcare overhaul. Even the nonpartisan CBO warns it will fail to lower the costs as promised. The President and the Democratic majority in Congress have a right to chart their own course. They've got all the power. But ignoring the realities of today's economy and the needs of working families and small businesses only exacerbates the economic challenges before us. There's now even talk of a second, or is it a third, stimulus bill. But those in charge say we are not allowed to call it a stimulus bill. To do so would acknowledge the failure of the stimulus bill passed in January. So what is the majority? What is it that the President is considering for this new, don't call it a stimulus bill? More government spending, more bailouts for states, more transfer payments to individuals, and expanding government agencies. All, of course, financed with more borrowing and more debt. It sure sounds like the other stimulus bill to me. The question for us then, is there a better way? Can we grow this economy? Can we create jobs and help struggling families without further mortgaging our children's future? Is there a no-cost jobs plan? As Mike said, I chair the Economic Recovery Solutions Working Group for the House Republicans. This group of members has been meeting all year on ways to improve the economy. And lately, our focus has been on a no-cost jobs plan. So as the President kicks off his job summit tomorrow, I'd like to highlight some common sense proposals that we've had under discussion that I believe are worthy of serious consideration by the President and the Democratic majority. Now, I know that there are philosophical differences between the parties, but surely we can agree on a few common sense things to help get America back to work. Let's begin with a simple premise. An overactive government did not make America the land of promise, prosperity, and opportunity. Why have our small businesses, entrepreneurs, and workers been so motivated to work hard and innovate over the years? It's because hard work was rewarded. Why have investors and job creators around the world looked to the United States and its capital markets? Because America was a place where taxes and regulations fostered competitiveness, fostered accountability, and transparency. Why have countries around the world made the U.S. dollar the world's reserve currency? Because America was a rock of financial stability, but pursued sound fiscal policies. So with that in mind, what is it that we should be pursuing? First, we must tear down self-imposed obstacles to economic growth and wealth creation. The prospect of a barrage of tax increases, new government regulation, and costly government mandates have had a paralyzing impact on our job creators. As the CEO of a steelmaker recently told the Wall Street Journal, "I'm not going to do anything until these things, healthcare, climate legislation, and others, go away or are resolved." Therefore, Congress and the administration should stop the deluge of detrimental rules and regulations. Since taking office, this administration has put on the table over 100 detrimental regulations, each with an impact of $100 million or more on the economy. The President should issue an executive order mitigating the impact of any proposed rule that would adversely affect jobs, the economy, and small businesses. Second, we should agree now to block any federal tax increases at all until unemployment drops below 5%. That includes any new taxes to pay for more spending or any automatic tax increases embedded in federal law. Americans of all political stripes agree that the government should never raise taxes during periods of high unemployment. Obviously, there is a philosophical differences on taxes, but clearly in a time like this, we can agree on that. The revenues higher taxes will generate are much better off in the pockets of families and small businesses. Third, we need to restore confidence in America's economic future. Record deficits and debts, coupled with runaway spending, have shaken confidence in that economic future. Many believe that the only solutions will be higher taxes or inflating the dollar, which promise lasting pain for small businesses and working families. One simple solution is to freeze domestic discretionary spending at last year's levels without raising taxes. This would save U.S. taxpayers $53 billion immediately. But more importantly, it would send a signal that we are committed to lowering the deficit. Fourth, we should reform the unemployment system to help people out of work actually find jobs. Federal unemployment recipients who are likely to exhaust benefits should be required to participate in education, training, or enhanced job searches. A program such as this in Ohio resulted in the return on investment of 5 to 1 in terms of savings compared to program costs. In Georgia, there's another example of how states are experimenting and paving the way. An innovative program there places unemployment insurance recipients in part-time jobs with the UI as their benefit. At the end of a 6-week trial period, the employer makes a decision about whether to hire the individual. The initiative has resulted in quicker returns to work and less unemployment payments. Why not bring this kind of innovative, outside-the-box thinking to Washington? Furthermore, declining negative balances in unemployment trust funds will force states to implement payroll tax hikes on employers this year. These will average almost $250 per worker per year through 2012. The federal government could help ease the burden on employers by immediately suspending the federal unemployment tax. This would save employers $56 per worker per year. And the $7 billion a year cost of this tax suspension could be offset through a reduction of improper government payments, which, according to the administration's own count, totaled $98 billion last fiscal year. That's an increase of $26 billion over the previous. Fifth, we need to approve 3 promising free trade agreements with Colombia, South Korea, and Panama that have stalled under the new administration. Recently, the President stated that increasing U.S. exports by just 1% would create over 250,000 jobs. Sure enough, the Independent International Trade Commission estimates that the 3 deals would boost U.S. exports by over 1%. We urge President Obama and Congress to stand on the side of job creation and quickly approve these agreements. Sixth, we must take action to reduce regulatory and tax barriers that inhibit domestic job creation. Federal regulation and tax law often make it easier for large companies to create jobs overseas instead of here at home. Efforts should be taken to ensure the most favorable environment possible for domestic job creation. For example, we should act immediately to remove obstacles to domestic energy production. Tapping more heavily into oil, natural gas, shale, nuclear, and renewable sources will lower costs, create jobs, and reduce our reliance on foreign oil. We can also provide an incentive for companies to repatriate earnings back to the United States. Currently, any profits a U.S. company earns abroad are taxed at the 35% corporate tax rate when those earnings are brought back home to the United States. As a result, American companies often keep their earnings stranded in subsidiaries overseas. In 2004, Congress allowed companies a limited time to repatriate foreign earnings and paid a reduced tax rate of 5.25%. The policy resulted in more than $350 billion of profits being returned to the United States and a windfall to the Treasury of about $18 billion in tax revenue. Providing another limited window of repatriation of foreign earnings would help U.S. companies retain domestic workers and weather the current economic downturn. Finally, we must deal swiftly and honestly with the looming commercial real estate collapse. Congress should move quickly to give bank regulators incentives to deal responsibly with banks and their borrowers. Forcing liquidation of performing loans just makes no sense. If regulators could assume a prudent posture toward risk, the badly wounded credit market that we're experiencing would begin the process of repair. In addition, reducing the overextended depreciation standard, currently a whopping 39.5 years, to 20 years or less, would provide a lift to property values and bring some common sense back to the tax code. These are 7 simple solutions that don't involve massive new government spending, new bureaucracies, or more debt. They are based on time-honored principles, proven to create jobs and ultimately economic prosperity in America. I'd like to share with you a story about Thomas Jefferson. It may be just a story, but it is an inspiration for us during these times. President Jefferson was riding on horseback from the White House back to his home in Monticello near Charlottesville, Virginia. He was with an entourage of men on horseback. They reached a river for which there was no bridge or no ferry. So the men decided they'd have to get off, walk their horses across to get to the other side. One by one, the men went first, and the president was last. As they filed into the river, they passed a gentleman on the riverbank. Finally, when it got to the president, this gentleman, who had a big bundle by his side, approached the president and asked for a lift. President Jefferson, in that true tradition of a Virginia gentleman, said absolutely, and allowed the gentleman to get up on his horse, and the president led the gentleman and his bundle across the water. When the group got to the other side, the president's men were furious. And they asked the gentleman, how in the world, why did you do that? Why did you ask the President of the United States for a lift when you could have asked us? This gentleman said, simply, I asked the President because each and every time I looked at one of you, I saw the letters N-O written across your forehead. When I saw the President, I saw the word Y-E-S. Yes, these are troubling and difficult times. Some of the worst that many of us have experienced in our lifetimes. But as leaders and public servants, the people of this country and the world are looking to us. They need to see a face that says yes. The contrast between our conservative vision and the policies being pursued by those in charge is stark. While they push for driving us deeper into debt, we will stand for the virtues of restraint. While they seek to expand government control, we will promote common sense solutions that have been proven to work. If our faces say yes, and we lead with character, enthusiasm, and also with an attitude towards seizing the opportunity before us, America can get across the river and continue to build that land of freedom that can and will lead the whole world. Thank you very much again for all of you and what you do towards the pursuit of service to that dream. Thank you to Heritage for having me. Thank you.
Well, the Congressman has some time for questions, and the first question we're going to take is not technically from the guy in the front row, but through him. Rob Bluey is going to ask a question from one of our viewers on Facebook.
Yes, thank you, Congressman Cantor. We were broadcasting today's speech on Facebook through Ustream, had about 500 viewers. And Dan Letterman wants to ask you a question. Why would the cap-and-trade legislation stifle job growth and limit American companies?
First of all, the cap-and-trade legislation obviously is a scheme by which some think we could reduce carbon emissions. But it starts with the premise that perhaps Washington can identify a commodity and begin to assess value and charge people for the use of that commodity. That is anathema to many of us who believe in the free markets, and the free markets should be setting prices of commodities. Ultimately, how the cap-and-trade bill would impact small businesses, working families would have to pay an additional charge to turn on the light switch, to fill up the gas tank, or do whatever it is that we do under that bill that could end up resulting in increasing carbon emissions. I don't think that the American people right now especially want Washington telling us what kind of fuel to use in our car, what kind of car to drive, when we can turn on our lights, and then charge us a tax to do so.
I was curious what your thoughts are on the president's speech last night about sending more troops to Afghanistan.
I think that certainly I, as well as my Republican colleagues, have always stood for providing our troops the resources they need to protect us in this country. Securing Afghanistan in that region, ensuring that it does not become a safe haven for terrorists to launch attacks against the United States is certainly within our national interest. So I support the decision. I'm troubled by continued insistence that we must juxtapose the commitment of troops with an announcement of a date certain that those troops will leave. We should be about success in executing a mission and yielding to the commanders on the ground to accomplish that mission.
Hello. Obviously, one of the most troubling pieces of legislation that's being considered right now is the healthcare bill. I'd like to ask you if you had any ideas for how healthcare realistically could be made available and more effective to Americans. What are some of the what do you find are the best ideas out there for healthcare reform in general?
Just in general, I think that there's agreement on both sides of the aisle that the status quo is unacceptable. I think that Republicans several weeks ago in the House proffered our alternative. That alternative was focused on trying to fix the things that are broken without throwing out that which works in this country. First and foremost, I think that the issue of the inequities of our system, dealing with the insurance companies, the fact that folks with pre-existing conditions may be denied coverage is something that needs to be addressed. We had in our bill a proposal to create universal access programs at the state level to allow for essentially reinsurance pools to mandate that they be created, that insurance companies could draw upon them to offer pre-existing condition patients with competitive insurance rates. We, I think, throughout our proposal felt and do feel that there is no competition for individual insurance in this country. We are a country where 70% of those, nearly 70% outside the Medicare market, are insured at their employer. So we don't have a lot of action in terms of insurance companies competing for individual business. So if we're about competition, it's not about putting government in place as a competitor. That's not going to bring down prices. What can bring down prices is true free market competition. That's why our bill also said allow individuals to purchase insurance policies across state lines. We also believe very strongly that you can't have health care reform unless you affect real medical liability reform. You got to get the frivolous lawsuits out of the equation. It is causing enormous amounts of waste. Even CBO validated that claim and said, look, you know, you've got almost $54 billion worth of waste due to the fact you've got frivolous lawsuits going on. So we had a variety of proposals, and I think in the end it was substantiated, our version, by the CBO, saying that individual market participants would receive up to a 10% reduction in health care costs. Even more than that, if you took an average policy under the Democratic bill and compared that to a policy under our bill, our policies were $5,000 a year cheaper for the average family. So again, we believe you can affect more coverage, you can affect reform by adding competition and lowering prices, and that's what our alternative did.
Mike, we have another question.
Okay.
Congressman Samir Kapadia, Heritage Foundation, also former intern of Congressman Frank Wolf. Sir, where do you see entitlement reform going in the future, especially with looking at bills like Frank Wolf's Safe Commission bill? If you could just comment a little bit on that. Thank you.
Sure. There's no question if we're going to get a handle on the economic future and the out-of-control deficits in this country, we've got to do something on entitlement reform. In fact, in our Republican alternative in the budget earlier this year, we did propose a beginning of bending the curve on entitlements. We'll have to deal with that. My concern about the SAFE bill is the creation of a commission that will more than likely produce the possibility for increased taxes. And we know now we can't go about increasing taxes and expect the quality of living in this country to stay the same. And we've got to look at ways to reduce spending, not only on the discretionary side, but certainly the mandatory side.
Another question from a Facebook user, Eric McDaniels. He's concerned about the loss of manufacturing jobs in America. He wants to know specifically what the plan that you're proposing today would do to help revive manufacturing jobs here in America.
Well, when you look at sort of the proposal that I just spoke of about getting rid of the detrimental rules and regulations that are impeding job growth and job creation. What I speak of there are some of the rules having to do coming out of EPA, the rules certainly that impact manufacturers right now. Cap and trade is a legislative example of what these kind of rules will do. I don't think any of us want to promote anything but clean air, but we've got to have an eye towards the cost and the benefit, and make sure we remember it is really about jobs that people care about right now. And if we want to get jobs created, we got to look to the small manufacturers, just like the small restaurant owners and service business owners. And so in our bill is a clear attempt to say, look, relieve the harm right now. You have done so much in terms of what you've seen the Democratic majority push. Again, whether it's cap and trade, whether it's card check, whether it is this spending hundreds of billions of dollars and incurring more debt, that has created such an environment of doubt and uncertainty as to what Washington will do next. Let's stop the harm. And I think we can agree on some of these things without maybe getting into their policy agenda, some of these things that could positively affect the manufacturing outlook in this country. Obviously, the trade agreements could be very beneficial to small manufacturers as well.
Congressman Lee Ross with Fox News. I'd like to go back to one of your simple solutions on tax cuts. And maybe I'm going to be a little bit of a devil's advocate on this, but could you explain why a tax increase would be okay at a point when unemployment is below 5%?
I would not support the suggestion that the tax increase would necessarily be okay. What I tried to articulate is that there is a philosophical difference between the parties on tax hikes. I don't believe that tax hikes is a way to promote a pro-growth outlook for the future. But what I'm trying to say here is we are in desperate times, and we've got to look for ways and solutions that we can agree upon in a bipartisan way. And I think all of us on either side of the aisle can agree that you ought not hike taxes during recession, and you ought not hike taxes when unemployment is so high. And so again, it is trying to go where I believe that we can work together and accomplish what's doable right now. Listen, I'm, as Mike said, I am a proponent of drastically reducing sort of the tax obligation in terms of job creators in this country. Can we affect that right now? I don't think that Speaker Pelosi or President Obama would embrace that. But I do think that the proposals I put forward are something that maybe they'll at least take a look at and say, hey, there's nothing crazy in here.
Facebook man.
Thank you. Another Facebook user, Don Irvine, wants to know about the invitees, the people who are invited to President Obama's Job Summit, and specifically what your thoughts are on leaving the Chamber of Commerce off of that list.
Well, any job summit should be about job creators. And we know that almost 70% of the new jobs in this country are created by small businesses. From the looks of those participating in the job summit, I don't see an overwhelming representation of small business owners. Perhaps they may change, but I would say to the White House, if they're serious about creating jobs, if they're serious about doing something productive at a forum and not just a photo op, that maybe they should bring some people who are experiencing the kind of pain that all of us hear about when we go home to the dinner table.
We have time for one last question. Whose hand didn't go up? Maggie. It's that. We'll go back to Facebook. Okay, Rob, want to grab another one?
Sure. Hector Luis Del Valle Beauchamp, sorry for the long name, wants to know your thought on the enterprise zone concept and how they might be applied to economically depressed areas in terms of helping job creation.
Again, the enterprise zone concept goes to the very essence of what entrepreneurialism is about in this country. It goes, from what I believe, to the secret of prosperity here, and that is to encourage risk-based investment. Our country has always been a country much more comfortable with calculated risk to seek reward. Many of the other societies across the world may be much more inclined to be about security and not take that extra step and risk something to achieve the opportunity that we all want. And so enterprise zones is just that. It's trying to reduce the price of risk in a certain area, perhaps a depressed area of a city, to encourage entrepreneurs who want to make a go of it. So I'm very supportive of that kind of policy.
On that note, would you please join me in giving a nice round of applause to the Congressman Cantor?
Thank you.